from trying to steer Killer away from the bushes he wanted to snack on. Her thighs began to quiver from gripping the saddle. Her new boots made her feet ache. Not even proper breeches could keep her bottom from getting saddle sore. Still, she enjoyed the ride when she wasn't biting back a groan of discomfort. The scenery was breathtaking. Wandering over the hills that were decked out in fall's blaze of color, she couldn't help thinking there wasn't a place on earth more beautiful than Virginia in autumn. If she could master sitting on a horse without fear of imminent death, she could picture spending many hours riding over these hills with Rye. Damnation! He was handsome in black boots and skin-tight gray breeches that did nothing to disguise his muscular thighs or the impressive evidence of his gender. The black polo shirt he wore strained itself across his shoulders and chest. In another century, he would have made a magnificent knight, powerful, back erect, hands light on the reins. Maggie would have gotten dizzy looking at him if she hadn't already been dizzy from sitting on top of a four-legged skyscraper. "That was your stallion your trainer was riding, wasn't it?" she asked, trying to get her mind off the flex and play of the muscles in his thighs. "Yep, that was him. Rough cut." "Katie tells me you're going to retire him." Rye's narrowed eyes watched her carefully. "His last competition is in 2 weeks. The Albemarle Cup Grand Prix. He gets a few months off, then starts standing at stud in February." Oh, maybe this wasn't the greatest topic after all, Maggie thought. She wanted to show an interest in his business, but she really didn't think talking about studs and servicing and the like was going to do much to get her mind off Ryland's body. Side by side, their horses trudged up a short, steep hill, following an old logging trail that made a wide, clean path through the woods. "If you retire your best horse, will Mr. Atherton stay on?" Rye turned sharply in his saddle, his expression intense enough to bore through solid steel. "Why the hell would you care?" Maggie was so startled she nearly jumped off her horse. "I was just asking." "If you're so all fire keen on Atherton, why don't you go riding with him? I'm sure he'd be more than happy to give you private lessons," he said with a sneer. I don't want," she stammered, completely taken aback by Rye's behavior. "What in the world's gotten into you? Did you get bit by one of those mountain ticks or something? You're raving like a lunatic. All I did was ask a simple question." "Gosh almighty!" He swore long and fluently under his breath, as much at his own behavior as anything. What was the matter with him all of a sudden? "Well, is he?" Maggie asked. "Is he what?" he snapped. "Staying on as your trainer." "Yes." She rolled her eyes and heaved a long, suffering sigh. "Fine." "Humph," he said with a snort. "Sure it is." Maggie stared at him speculatively, a slow smile curving her mouth. "Why, Ryland Quaid, I do believe you're jealous." His scowl intensified. "Am not." She grinned to herself. Point to McSwain. She was so happy she nearly forgot she was on a horse and almost launched herself into Rye's arms. If he cared enough to get jealous, then she had something more to build on besides lust. She batted her lashes at him coyly and conjured up her most seductive voice. "You don't have anything to worry about, sugar. He's not half the man you are." Rye blushed.
Mert shot Elminster a questioning look, but the old archwizard merely looked grave and turned casually to look back at the doors behind them to see if any other intruders were in sight. Lerol was writhing on the floor by the time she finished with her would-be slayers, twisting and groaning and drenched with sweat, her nightgown plastered to her. Mert had seen people fished out of the harbor who'd looked drier. Elle took her hand, but as far as Mert could tell, he was offering the reassurance of a friend to someone wounded or dying, not pouring any sort of healing magic into her. "Can we do anything for her?" Mert asked, almost exasperated. "Change the mind of a goddess," Elminster murmured, "if you've nothing else to do for the next century or so." At that moment, Laryl let out a long, shuddering sigh under him and went limp. Mert leaned forward anxiously, but she'd relaxed, not lapsed into insensibility. "Well?" the old archwizard asked her, as calmly as if she'd just finished examining an everyday and rather boring ledger entry. "I could learn nothing from them. They're hired meat who've been disminded by priests of power. All that's left in their memories, aside from endless echoes of Waterdeep so they recall its layout, is mental images of me, the filed at the palace plans of this house, and that they were to come here and slay me." Laryl tried to rise then, but her strength gave way. El caught her head before it struck the floor, and then put his arms around her and gently lifted her to a sitting position. "They're far from the first," she added calmly, patting his hand in thanks. "Fresh gown?" he asked. "In a breath or two," Laryl told him. "Just let me bide here. I'm still—" "I know," El murmured comfortingly. "Well, I don't," Mert snapped. "What just happened to you?" El cast a swift look at the bound assassins all around them, as if to reassure himself that they were all still unconscious, and said quietly, "These days, we chosen touch the minds of others with magic only when the need is dire. Doing so ruins most minds, so Mystra has absolutely forbidden us from invading the minds of anyone who can wield the art." "I kept going after the first man," Laryl put in, "to try to learn all I could, and because there was no damage I could do, these minds were already ruined. In their greed, they traded a pile of coins for their selves, their memories, and everything that made them who they were." Mert frowned. "Is that why the war wizards in Cormyr don't cheerfully mind-ream everyone standing nearby these days?" Elminster nodded. "Really thorough and prolonged attempts to read minds with the art have always been risky, for the prober and the owner of the mind. If ye aren't very careful, you do harm," Laryl offered, "like a know-nothing warrior with a knife trying to help a wounded friend on the battlefield. The likelihood of ruining the mind you're trying to explore, particularly if it's awake and hostile, has soared over this last century," El said grimly. Laryl nodded. "So if you can't call on the weave to steady you and provide some of the energy, ruination is now almost certain. And it has always tired and harmed the wizard trying to mind-read," El added. "So Mystra made it hurt so dearly that a mage using spells without weave aid will collapse before they learn much of anything. We chosen can keep going, so she forbade us to probe wizards and strongly cautioned us against mind-reading anyone else, adding the pain to keep us to that." "Ah," said Mert. "So as wizards are now rarer and more precious than ever, you're not to be driving any of them insane." "More insane," Laryl joked, and promptly winced and clutched her head in fresh pain. "We can still do it, but," Elminster began. "You're all weaker now, aren't you?" Mert asked. "Not hurling spells around like you once did, being less bold to challenge or take up fights." He let his words trail away as he saw the same bland expression settle across the faces of both Elminster and the Lady Silverhand. A look that he'd once long ago termed the "Did you say something? Not that I'm listening or ever intend to answer you" expression. "Not that it's any of my business," he added into the deepening silence. Then he asked brightly, "How about that fresh gown? You haven't moved the robing rooms, have you?"
Such a diplomat, most senior lord of Waterdeep," Laeral replied with a smile. "The nearest left side, any of the 3 hanging there."
"Only 3?" he joked as he groaned his own way to his feet. "Are you sure you're a woman?"
"A witty diplomat, too," she replied serenely.
And then she looked past Mert and her face changed. He whirled around. Elminster had already turned and taken 2 steps toward the door he and Mert had come in by. Someone had just knocked on it, and then tried it without waiting for a response and was now stepping through it. Even in the deepest, darkest Kelbin declaiming moments of her dream, Vajra had known she would end up here. It wasn't her favorite room in the tower. That would be the room up above she'd just left in her restlessness, unable to sleep again, though the night was yet young. The bedchamber with its round bed and its domed ceiling adorned with all the stars of Toril winking down at her was her preferred room. The bed that felt so empty when she lay in it all alone, but she was never going to bring any rough docker inside the walls of Blackstaff Tower, and they were the only men she both wanted and dared taste these days, on the rare nights when the loneliness raged and she sought the docks in spell-spun disguise. Yet this lower room, the one she was in now, it was the room she felt the most at home in, and in which she did the most work. The round room was dominated by a central tabletop that displayed a magnificent building-by-building map of the city of Waterdeep. Her city now, for she was more bound to it than even its hidden lords, or the open lord in the palace. Even if that open lord was no longer the arrogant Neverember of Neverwinter, but rather the woman who'd called this tower home for so many years. Laeral of the Chosen, with her silver hair stirring about her shoulders and the little leaping silver flames in her eyes as she stared at you. Stared through you, leaving you feeling unworthy, weak, a charlatan in office, a slip of a lass bearing a title that belonged to the man who'd been hers, the Blackstaff, the great Kelbin. We can none of us best the dead, for they are not here making new mistakes for all to see. They are beyond that at last. Laeral had said that to her, and in a kindly voice, too, but that made it no less of a dismissal of her worth, a measuring of what little she'd done. Yet she was the Blackstaff now. She would show Lady Laeral Silverhand and everyone else that she was worthy of the office. She would do right by Waterdeep. This bustling city where everyone else strove to do right by themselves, and complained when the City of Splendors didn't measure up in this small way or that, but lifted no finger to make it better. She, Vajra, would make a difference. Though if the wagging tongues in the street ever realized how alone and ignorant she was, they would hurl her down in an instant, like wolves pouncing on the weakest prey. She must work and prepare, and work some more, mustering her magic in readiness, layer upon layer, prepared item upon prepared item, as well as her spells, so that no matter what happened, she could unleash a mighty response. So strong an answer to foes that no sane opponent would ever think a challenge worth it. That was the best way. cow them all into not daring to work their misdeeds. And part of that work was clearly seeing the coming threats. She'd been slow to see the true rising strength of the cult of the dragon, had dismissed their secret chants to Tiamat as so much wishful reverence. She could not afford, Waterdeep could not afford more misjudgments like that one. Something was stirring among the giants now, and she hadn't the faintest idea what. That unknowing must change. There was trouble in the Underdark, too, a part of why some of its denizens were stealing back up into Skullport. But was it no more than the usual skirmishes between and among nearby drow cities and Illithids, and all those who stood against them? Or something bigger? And the watchful order was little help. Oh, Bogentra meant well, but she and faithful Glenmar were consumed with keeping increasingly fractious city mages like Casmult or Lavalander, rising new masters of wizardry flush with the coins of nobles and those who wanted to become noble, and increasingly the demanding voices of those who paid them so well from becoming full-fledged tyrants. Begin with an easy step, she reminded herself. Gain it, stand upon it, and then take larger ones, resisting the temptation to seek out more easy steps and spend time treading them, all so the harder, larger tasks can be avoided for as long as possible. That is the courtier's way, and if we all do as courtiers do, the world is doomed, and us with it. It was surprising how often she recalled the advice of Elminster these days. A mischievous, lecherous old goat she'd once judged him, and a fool besides. But it was surprising how much wisdom he seemed to have learned in these latter years. And she could begin to take one easy step here and now in this room. Padding barefoot on the smooth, warm stone, she circled the table swiftly so her nightrobe would swirl in her wake. Yes, such childish delights were her entertainment now, and looked along the roll of years picked out in gilt rings along the edge of the table. This was the year of the Scarlet Witch, and she was come late to this table. She should have been trying to learn just who the Scarlet Witch was, and what that being would do of importance last year, instead of waiting until now, the unusually warm and balmy middle of Myrtle. What was that orc saying? Burn that bridge when we're standing on it? Yes, that was precisely what she was risking. She could well be trying to guide Waterdeep by seeing what lay ahead as it was already happening. Still, no matter when one leaps into battle, one needs arms and armor, so... The seers may have been mad, or the gods may have whispered all sorts of nonsense to them, and priests in their temples misconstrued it all ever since. But still... The name of every year can and should guide us, she said the old temple rood aloud. None of them are meaningless. So now... Her gaze strayed across the sprawling city map, and then she looked up to scan the great map of Faerun that curved around so much of the wall. Waterdeep was but a tiny dot in such a vast expanse of countryside, so the Scarlet Witch was so much more likely to arise or do whatever she was going to do out there, somewhere, rather than in the shadow of Mount Waterdeep. And she hadn't the faintest who or what the Scarlet Witch was, had heard nothing, beyond the empty speculations of others who read the roll of years and wondered aloud, and, of course, priests who twisted every single year name into something concerning their deity and their deity alone, priests who talked little about how distant almost every god seemed to have suddenly become, and at least here in Waterdeep were all, every last faith more cautious and less forceful in matters of local politics. The city had noticed that all the temples were suddenly far more reluctant to try to bring the dead back to life, no matter how much coin was offered for their altars. This city held temples full of priests who probably didn't have any better idea about the Scarlet Witch than she had. So, where to begin? Journeying across Faerun in some wild wandering search seemed pointless, not to mention irresponsible for someone whose office should mean vigilance here in Waterdeep, even if she dared to use a portal. Across the room, her remaining fragment of the black staff flared with a sudden rich blue radiance, a thrillingly beautiful glow that faded again as swiftly as it had come. Vajra stared at that precious black stick, jutting up so still and silent from the stand she'd fashioned for it. What had made it do that? Was it trying to tell her to use a portal, or shun them? Or had it flared for some other reason entirely? It went a more purple hue when someone was trying to use magic to force a way into the tower, but beyond that, she hadn't the foggiest. Almost before she thought about doing so, she'd crossed the room and caught up the black staff. Its shortened length was more of a rod or scepter for her than a staff, and the gems that had been so deeply embedded in it as to be nigh hidden down its smooth black length now stood proud up and down it, like so many glossy knobs on an old man's walking stick. As she took hold of it, some of those embedded stones winked at her, tiny lights playing in their depths in a brief, welcoming pattern. It felt warm to the touch, as it almost always did, and when she closed her eyes and clutched it to her body, there came the usual sensation of sinking down into it, of drawing closer to a great sleeping mind in its depths. Which was why she so often slept embracing the fragment, learning what she could from the dream visions it sent her. She would do that now. She shrugged off her nightrobe, letting it sigh into a silken puddle on the floor behind her, clutched what was left of the black staff tightly against her, and headed for the stairs back up to bed. Not that she felt the slightest bit sleepy. Oh, Mistra Forfend, let it not be another of those nights. The slender, handsome man in skin-tight gray leathers perched on the roof edge as motionless as any sculpted stone gargoyle, watching would-be murderers at work. The stars were out and winking down as the cool of night settled on the harbor and the sea fog started to steal in. Soon its damp and moonlit haze would cloak the docks and the moored ships in thick wet shrouds no gaze could pierce, but for now the moon and stars still reigned, and Drake could see the assassins clearly as they scaled the wall that encircled Mirt's mansion. It was still called that, yonder darkly turreted and eccentric home nestled in the rising rock flank of Mount Waterdeep, though Mirt the moneylender had not been seen in Waterdeep for more than 100 years. The lords of the city had recently gifted it to the new open lord of Waterdeep, Lady Laerall Silverhand. And before this night was out, Laerall might taste the price of taking that title. No less than 6 assassins, by Drake's count, were stealthily seeking her life. No lights shone in the sleeping mansion. The spy sat still and watched the bringers of death sidle across the slender strip of garden, avoiding the stone bridge that linked the tallest turret to a path meandering over the shoulder of the soaring mountain. It took them surprisingly little time to breach the garden doors, and they did so more quietly than he'd expected. Well now, they just might succeed after all. Drake sat very still, save for the tips of the fingers of his right hand. They caressed an itch he was unaccustomed to. A tiny fresh brand burned into the side of his neck behind his right ear, a blood bond, It would mean his doom if he betrayed the worm who'd branded him. But he was richer now in just a 10-day than he'd ever been in his life before. And the second promised payment had been on time, and not a gem less than promised. 12 more such payments, and he'd be wealthier than some noble lords in this city. And for that, he'd do many dark deeds for many worms. Sleep was every whit as elusive as Vajra had feared it would be. The surviving fragment of the black staff was its head and upper shaft, about 3 feet long in all, as dead black as lightless velvet, and usually as cold and malignant as a yawning tomb. Even so, she clutched it when abed, learning far more than any tutor of the art had ever shown her. And despite the unyielding authority of Kelvin that lingered in the staff as if he were still alive and staring disapprovingly at her out of it, the broken remnant of the black staff somehow reassured her more than any mentor had ever been able to. Right now she was lightly dozing, dimly aware of the stars in the ceiling above her as the staff vividly showed her several of the walking statues of Waterdeep, one after another, as they stood in daylight over this past warming month, frozen just where they'd stopped their rampages after the spell plague. Though she heard his voice in her mind, not at all. She could almost hear Kelvin reminding her that awakening the stone behemoths to move again was something she could do, by means of what was left of the staff. She could move them to better locations so rebuilding could occur in the places where they stood now, freeing them to be more swiftly ready to defend the city if an orc horde or more dragon attacks should come. A statue is awakened thus and is commanded like this and... commanded. Furthering the causes that were right. Setting Waterdeep to rights. Using the rightful power of the Blackstaff, the unyielding dark strength that endures beyond death despite setbacks, regardless of... There were no eyes in the round, starry-domed bedchamber at the top of Blackstaff Tower to see what happened to her then, and no mirrors for her to see herself. Yet her eyes shot open as 2 royal blue flames, eerily lambent glows without eyeballs, uniform deep ovals of blue fire. And she sat bolt upright, face curiously expressionless, the black staff clutched to her breast. She rose from the bed, dressed in silent, deft efficiency, and strode out of Blackstaff Tower, the fragment under her arm. As she stepped out into the night, it winked the same rich royal blue as her eyes, and they promptly lost their fire, leaving behind a dark-eyed, dusky-skinned woman who looked all around her in puzzled apprehension. Then she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and strode off through the moonlit streets with determined purpose, heading south around the castle spur of Mount Waterdeep. Sentries on its high battlements saw her, and wondered what urgent business took the Blackstaff out alone at this time of night. The more cynical among them murmured the same thought. They'd no doubt know soon enough. The someone who came through the door that had been Mert's and was now Leral's was female. She was short and dusky-skinned and slender, her dark hair clipped close. Her eyes were large, dark, and grim, even before they saw the sprawled and bound bodies of the assassins. Elminster indicated her with a flourish. "I have the honor to present," he said gravely, with as much dignity as any herald, "Vajra Saphar, the 7th Blackstaff of Waterdeep." "Well met," Laral offered, and the rote greeting sounded genuine. "What brings you to my door at this hour, Lady of the Staff?" Vajra nodded a little uncertainly, took a deep breath, and said, "Grim news. A lord of the city has just been found murdered. Avner Ravelmark."
Ravelmark and Gorlar last night. 2 masked lords in as many nights.
The Blackstaff nodded unhappily. "The talk among the watch patrols I passed on the way here is that this is the former Open Lord's doing. Revenge for being deposed." Lerol reached out to Elminster for support, hauled herself upright by climbing the arm he offered, and gave Vadra a thoughtful frown.
"Earlier this evening I received a delegation, 2 guildmasters, Scropa of the furriers and wool weavers and ration staff of the innkeepers, and the matriarch of a senior noble house, Lady Branneth Lyra Estelmer, came to see me about Gorlar's death. They were concerned by talk they'd overheard, and what they themselves suspected, of involvement by agents of the deposed Lord Daggelt Neverember.
And
I gave them my opinion, which is this. So far as I can tell, to blame Neverember is an unsupported step too far. The man did leave agents behind to meddle in Waterdavian politics as well as mere supporters, and it seems he does not wish me well or that I have an easy tenure. But all I can learn of what those agents did yesterday suggests that he is not actively involved in Gorlar's killing."
Vadra took a step closer, her eyes narrowing, and hefted the fragment of the Blackstaff. "You've not heard yet, I see."
"Heard what?"
Lerol asked. That last word soft, yet somehow at the same time as sharp as the crack of a whip. The Blackstaff's head reared back as if she'd been slapped. "Lady Estelmer," Vadra said flatly, "has been attacked, and her skull split. Her wits have suffered grievously, and she's not expected to survive. Guildmaster Aldemir Scropa has been killed in an accident involving masonry falling on him from above, in a South Ward back street. Brickwork that somehow fell outward a good dozen feet or more farther than should have been possible."
"And Rationstaff?"
Lerol asked sharply. "Vanished. Not even his family knew until I came pounding on his door looking for him on my way here. He went to bed with his wife, slipped something into her evening broth to make her sleep. She's still drifting in and out, can't stay awake longer than it takes her to spout a few sentences, and then got dressed and slipped out the bedroom window, where someone was waiting for him with a knife. There's a trail of blood on the ground outside that just stops." Lerol sighed, then took 2 strides so she could bring both fists down on one of Mirt's best polished tables as thunderously as any furious fighting man, and muttered, "Waterdeep. Bloody Waterdeep. The worst of it is, I know I'm going to get used to things like this."
"I did,"
Mirt growled.
"You're not helping, old wolf."
"Want me to hire some adventurers and go hunting missing guildmasters?"
"Not yet. You'd be serving as too tempting a scapegoat for whoever's murdering masked lords."
Mirt grinned and nodded appreciatively. "Oh, you're going to be fine." Lerol rolled her eyes.
"I never liked ruling. I like wandering the wilds, breathing the fresh air and looking out over the landscape."
"While prowling monsters stalk you and wait for the right moment to pounce," Elminster murmured.
Lerol gave him a hard look. "When you're a woman with silver hair and these," she gestured at her bosom, "men stalk and pounce all the time. I got used to it quite a few centuries back." Then she turned to the Blackstaff. "In the morning, will you contact as many of the masked lords as you can and have them meet me at the palace? They need to be warned, and I want to watch their faces as we talk, in case any of them seem just a bit too smirkingly complacent about the deaths so far."
"If they all head there and the Slayer is watching, we'll be identifying masked lords for him," Badger replied. Laral sighed. He, or she, already knows how to identify and slay masked lords, doesn't he? Vajra sighed as well, added a curse under her breath, nodded, and headed for the door. "Should you be walking alone in Dock Ward by night, lady?" Mert rumbled. "I'm the Black Staff," she replied without turning or slowing, "not a defenseless maiden." When she opened the door, a strong smell of smoke came in out of the night. What Laral had taken to be harbor fog drifting past the windows held the reek of wood smoke and tar and worse things. And then she saw the first flickering amber reflections on the highest rocks of the castle spur. Mert and Elminster were out the door in such a rush they sent Vajra staggering back out of the way. Laral sprinted to join them as a crackling roar rose from behind her. It came from beyond the house, from the harbor. They all turned as the first wash of heat warmed their faces, and found themselves looking into the leaping flames of the 9 hells. Boardwalks and lashed-together ships stood like black sticks, silhouetted against orange-white flames that roared skyward in a crackling hurry to lick the stars. Mistshore was ablaze. Chapter 2. Waterdeep Watches. Though it may seem as if all Waterdeep rushes and bustles about with eyes and minds only for their own business at hand, it profits everyone to always remember that part of their business is watching what is unfolding around them, without seeming to, in hopes of seizing on the next big thing, the next road to riches, even if only to sneer. Waterdeep always watches. Largreth, the Good Knight, in Chapter 5 of The Rise of Randrel, a chapbook adventure by Sandrith Yendril of Neverwinter, published in the year of the Striking Hawk. Darleth Drake hadn't survived a score of Waterdavian summers by being unobservant or careless. He was looking for trip threads before he ascended the outside stair, and so, of course, he found them. Her usual thin black threads, so many more daring little black gowns that would never be mended. Yet when he reached the door at the top of the stair after avoiding them all, it opened before he could reach for it. So they'd been watching for him out the lone window, too. Drake smiled, tucked himself to one side of the door, and waited. "Come in," his employer said after several long moments of silence. She sounded irritated. "We've waited long enough." Inevitably. Haste and a direct journey aren't wise if one hopes not to be followed, Drake replied, stepping into the darkness and sidestepping immediately along the inside wall, so the man he knew would be nearby with weapon in hand could swing the door shut. "Were you followed?" That man, the guildmaster, asked sharply. Stout Cuthbarrel was sweating, his calmness a rather poor act, not like the 2 lithe, slender, and dangerously pretty young noblewomen in the room. A bare, rather dirty rented room with cracks in its yellowing plaster walls and nary a bench to sit on. Not the surroundings customarily preferred by nobles, but perhaps they'd enjoyed lounging languidly against the walls. Not that they needed the practice. Drake shook his head. Lundrith's diversion worked. Mistshore will be burning for days, and half of Dock Ward will be busy shifting cargoes away from the heat. That's what's riding their minds right now. Not the assassination of the Open Lord of Waterdeep. Zarela, the woman who was not his employer, did not sound in the least surprised. Interesting. Not, Drake confirmed. The Blackstaff entered and soon departed again, with none of the hurry or upset she'd have shown if the Lady Silverhand was dead. Unless she was in on the killing, of course. Any idea who is? Drake shrugged. Many ideas, but mere guesses, all of them. And we're not in the guessing game. Thank you, Drake. That little quirk of Tashin's mouth meant that his employer meant those words as a clear dismissal, so Drake bowed and went out. He headed back down the stairs without closing the door behind him so they could watch him go and make sure he was out of earshot. They'd take his vault over the railing halfway down as avoiding a tripwire, not a move to the underside of the flight of steps so he could clamber right back up it unseen beneath the open treads. Someone, Cuthbarrel most likely, started to close the door again, but his employer said, "Don't bother. It's time to be gone. I think we're all done with waiting." With all the flames and smoke, the city will be awake and gawking if they aren't already, said the woman who was not his employer. You mean we won't be trying for another tonight? Cuthbarrel grunted. That's fine by me. Tomorrow night at yours? At mine, Drake's employer confirmed. We'll have Hailing Horse next. They all moved as the guildmaster swung the door open, so Drake swung himself to the underside of the top stair landing and braced himself there. It wouldn't do to have any of the three see him while they were removing trip threads. Not that his employer would be all that surprised. Elminster peered down one more hallway, polished marble floor, gleaming wood-paneled walls, arch-shaped wooden ceiling, and caught sight of yet another palace servant watching them, the 43rd he'd counted since their arrival through the back door, and he'd probably missed spotting a few. He turned back to Lairall and murmured, "It seems they watch over you rather intently here. What are they afraid their open lord might do, I wonder?" Lairall sighed. "They mean well. They've been trained to leap before a lord of Waterdeep can get the word frog all the way out, aye?" Elminster commented. "Neverember must have been a proper terror." Lairall shrugged. "From all I've heard, he was simply a no-nonsense, energetic, charge-ahead leader." Elminster smiled. "Like I said." Lairall decided it was time to sigh again, but thankfully they'd reached the door she'd been heading for. "In here," she told him, leading the way. "We can be less formal and more private." Here was an office dominated by a large round wooden table that was itself dominated by huge stacks of parchments, some of which had overflowed onto the accompanying chairs. 2 seats facing each other along the curve of the table were still unencumbered. Lairall gracefully lowered her long-legged 6 feet into one of them and indicated the other. Elminster sat down, tapped his empty and unlit pipe approvingly against the carved edge of the table, and said gently, "So, unburden thyself, lass. Repeated assassination attempts, sullen guildmasters, a sneering nobility, dastardly agents of the not-quite-vanished Neverember seemingly everywhere, some citizens pushing for war with Neverwinter so they can sell swords and helms and blankets and all, and the usual intransigence and feuding among the masked lords, with some of them angry with ye for not being content to be puppet or empty-headed figurehead, and the rest angry with ye for not fixing everything with the wave of your art-endowed hand. Aye?" "Economically summarized," Lairall said ruefully. "But aside from the Neverember element, which I suspect is far more imagined and rumored than it is real, 'twas ever thus. You mustered your summation so effortlessly because the open lord of Waterdeep always faces such challenges. Yet the city faces real problems I must somehow get my fellow lords to enact good governance upon. There's a malady spreading in Downshadow, though it hasn't yet risen to the notice of those whose tongues spread rumors in the streets. There have been several subsidences in the southern half of the city, buildings collapsing into their own cellars when said delvings were being enlarged, with men buried or crushed and guilds getting angry as blame is hurled about. not to mention fresh reports of dragons being seen in the skies, and giants standing on the slopes of Sar and Helimbrar spying on the city. Oh yes, and men in strange helms riding giant vultures amid the clouds above Desserin Vale. Ah, well, Elminster teased, ye can't say Waterdeep isn't laying on entertainments for ye. Hard work, I fear not, Laeral replied. Diplomacy, I flatter myself I can handle. Yet as I get older and my art fades, I find myself increasingly irked by the small matters, the minor annoyances that once I laughed off or brushed aside. How can Waterdeep ever be a place of harmony and civic pride when hateful and foolish rumors daily rule the minds and tongues of far too many sensible citizens? Such as? Several energetic someones are forcefully and persistently putting it about the deep that some fell wizard or the entire watchful order, as a way of blackmailing everyone so as to make their own bid for ruling power, will animate the walking statues and send them striding through the city, smashing the buildings of their foes, with their foes still inside them. Ye smell a campaign to spread this notion, as opposed to the usual overhearing and seizing upon and talking to others? I do, and there are more frivolous madwit irritations too. Laeral was getting annoyed, and her long, unbound silver hair was stirring, lifting from her shoulders to lash and swirl, the tresses questing in different directions. When her customarily twinkling emerald-green eyes met Elminster's, he saw that they were flaring silver. For instance, some bright spark is writing scathing commentary on my every utterance, and those of every guildmaster and loose-jawed noble in the deep, too, under the name of, Mistra help us, Volo. You'd think no one would want to borrow that particular name after its original bearer indulged in so much infamy, would you? Ah, but 'tis not borrowed, El informed her gently. 'Tis the same man. What? How by all the lost and hidden words of power did he survive beyond his due lifespan? Surely he mastered far too little art to— Mistra, El replied. If all we'd chosen were hunted down in the wake of her fall, she needed others to hold enough of herself so she could rise again. Others unexpected who would not be hunted down. So, though he knows it not, Volo became one of her unwitting champions. Laeral rolled her eyes. That scamp! He's almost as persistent an annoyance as Mert, or you. A twinkle arose in Elminster's eye. We try, he said gently, and turned away to reclaim his pipe, which had chosen the last few moments of his inattention to drift slyly away. His own art was lessened of late, and he knew that all of the 7 sisters had suffered more in this regard. None of them could mind scry at will any more, subtly or otherwise, and must needs resort to the brute force weave-powered scouring that wrecks minds as it reads them, and so was best used on the dying or dead before their brains were entirely cold. If Laeral now admitted to him that she was forgetting many spells, the details of casting them simply falling out of her head time after time so they were effectively lost to her, well, she wouldn't be the first of the sisters to reveal as much to him. He was doing it too, drawing directly on the weave and by sheer effort of will seeking to bring about specific effects where spells failed. It worked, but was often imprecise, and was very tiring. And while the 7 tended to have fiercer passion than he did, high emotion was best suited to the brief mighty strike, not the long and bitter endurance. That was his own mastery. Have ye Ironguard rings enough? He asked. Laeral's eyes were green again as she looked back at him. There was a lingering, deepening silence before she murmured, You know, don't you, that our art is failing, for all of us? He almost whispered. Of course. There had been something approaching fear in Laeral's face, but at his words it fell away, leaving her looking thoughtful.
She lifted her hand to show the plain ring on her longest finger. "Another rides in my hair, and I have 6 more hidden about the palace." Silently, Elminster did back his left sleeve to reveal a bracer on his forearm. Instead of armor plate, its rigid leather inner and outer surfaces bore pouches, and out of one he drew a bone pierced at both ends to hold either end of a thong. Untying one end of that length of leather, he slid 6 identical plain metal rings off the bone and dropped them into her hand. "You can never have too many. There are too few loyal folk in any city to leave even one unprotected, when ye discover their worth." "Thanks," Laeral said simply, and reached to her bodice to draw up a small purse on a fine chain into which the rings disappeared. "You are far more a creature of the weave than the rest of us, El. Tell me, just how much can I or any wielder of the art hope to hide from you?" Elminster shrugged. "Just about everything. There's simply too much going on at all times, too much overlapping chaos for me to watch and follow and anticipate. These days I'm more the man who glimpses an arrow hissing past out of thick smoke for an instant and tries to tell myself its fletching was this hue or that. Nay, Uncle Weirdbeard is no all-seeing spy, still less all-knowing. Well, that's a relief. Your life would be so boring if ever—" Laeral's large eyes were twinkling again. Elminster judged the time was right to ask her one of his own larger questions. "So, lass, tell me, when the delegation of masked lords came to ye, what made ye accept the position of open lord, and later even visit other lords of the city and try to persuade them to support ye?" "Mistra," Laeral replied flatly, and when El opened his mouth to ask more, she leaned forward, put a firm fingertip to his forehead, and poured a memory into his mind. He was Laeral, standing barefoot somewhere in the vast and dimly moonlit forest, the trees very dark, and what little light there was a deep blue. In the air before him floated those 2 gigantic long-lashed eyes, and Mistra's voice rolled into his head out of gentle depths. "Now that the Silver Marches is no more, stability is needed in the Sword Coast North, and I have other tasks for Illustriel. It's your turn on a throne." "On a throne?" Laeral asked sharply, then bit back a sigh to ask, "Where?" "In the Palace of Waterdeep. They'll turn to you soon enough. Accept. It is needful. Your presence will inhibit certain individuals who would otherwise push ahead with magic that will do much harm, and court the very real possibility that public mood will turn against wizards, with determination to exterminate, and wielders of the art will begin to fall." Laeral bowed her head. "So be it, so long as you know that I may have to eliminate some of them myself." "I trust you to do what is needful. You few, I can trust that far." And with that chilling sadness in the voice of the goddess they all served, Elminster was back in the cluttered little palace office with its heaps of parchment and many doors, blinking a little grimly at Laeral, who sat smiling wryly at him. "Elminster, I need your help in this." Elminster smiled back. "It's why I've come." "It's why I've come." Laeral almost allowed herself to relax in relief. Her old friend and sometime mentor smiled at her, the pipe he seemingly never filled and lit these days thrust jauntily into one corner of his mouth. He looked amused, and as Laeral watched, he plucked out the pipe and leaned forward to say something more, probably a jest. And then his face changed, acquiring a distinct look of alarm, and he said, "Excuse me,
I must leave ye to attend to a more pressing matter. I'll return soon, I hope." And he rose, spun around in a whirl of his old robe, and was gone from the room, winking out of existence a stride before he reached the closed door. Laurel sat suddenly alone in her office, shaking her head ruefully. "Secrets, always secrets," she whispered at the empty air where he'd been. "It's the part of being a chosen I've always hated the most. All the damned deceit." You only got a ceiling this high outside the mansions of high noses, that is, by punching up to take the height of 2 full floors
from Steph's entry and rushed inside. The interior was murky with smoke, and he could barely see well enough to make his way across the lobby to the hallway and the offices beyond. The stairway door to the upper floors was open, and he could hear shouts and cries from above. He coughed violently, covered his mouth with his wet sleeve, and tried to find some sign of the night manager. He couldn't remember who had the duty this week, but whoever it was nowhere to be found. He searched the length of the hallway and all the offices, without success. The basement door was closed. Smoke leaked from its seams, and it was hot to the touch. He ignored his instincts and wrenched it open. Clouds of smoke billowed forth, borne on a wave of searing heat. He shouted down the stairs, but there was no response. He started down, but the heat and smoke drove him back. He could see the flames spreading along the walls, climbing to the higher floors. Wooden tables, filing bins and cabinets, records and charts, and even the stairway were burning. He slammed the door shut again, backing away. There were footsteps on the stairway behind him, the women and children coming down from the upper floors. He limped over to meet them so that he could direct them to the front door. They appeared out of the gloom, dim shapes against the haze of smoke. They stumbled down in ones and twos, coughing and crying and cursing in equal measure, the children clinging to their mothers, the mothers clinging back, the women without children helping both, the whole bunch wrapped in robes and coats and even sheets. The smoke was growing thicker, and the heat increasing. He shouted at them to hurry, urging them on. He tried to count heads to determine how many had come out, so he could know how many were still inside. But he couldn't remember the number in residence, and he didn't know how many might have been admitted that afternoon after he left. 21, 22, 23... They were filing past him in larger groups now, bumping up against one another in their haste to get out. 35, 36. There had to be at least 90, probably more like 100. He peered through the haze, feeling the heat grow about him, seeing red flickers from down the hallway at the back of the building. The fire was climbing through the air vents. There was still no sign of Steph. Sirens screamed up to the front doorway, and firefighters clad in flame-retardant gear rushed inside in a knot. Ross was down on one knee now, coughing violently, eyes burning with the smoke, head spinning. They reached out for him and pulled him to his feet. He was too weak to resist, barely able to keep hold of his staff. Hoses were being dragged through the doorway, and he could hear the sound of glass being broken. "Who else is in here?" he heard someone ask. He shook his head. "More women and children, upstairs. Steph is up there, helping them." He retched violently and doubled over. "A night manager, somewhere." They hauled him outside into the cool, rainy night, propped him against the side of an ambulance, and gave him oxygen. He gulped it down greedily, his eyes gradually beginning to clear, his sight to return. Knots of women and children huddled all around him, shivering in the cold night air. His gaze settled on Fresh Start. Flames were climbing the exterior of the walls, shooting out of the second and third-story windows. Steph. He lurched to his feet and tried to push his way back inside, but hands closed tightly on his arms and shoulders and pulled him back again. "You can't do that, sir," a voice informed him quickly. Get back now, please." Windows exploded, showering the street with shards of glass. "But she's still in there," he gasped frantically, trying to make them understand, fighting to break free. More women and children were being hustled out, escorted by firefighters. A hook and ladder truck had rolled into position, and the extension was being run up toward the roof. Police cars had arrived to protect the firefighters and control traffic, and there were flashing lights everywhere. At the fringe of the action, a crowd was gathering to watch from behind cordoned lines. A mix of rain and hydrant water had turned the streets to rivers. Still struggling, Ross was moved back to the makeshift shelter, overpowered by the combined weight of his protectors. Fear and anger swept through him in a red haze, and he felt himself losing control. Steph! He had to go back in for Steph. And then she appeared, stumbling out the smoke-filled doorway of the shelter, a small child clutched in her arms. Firefighters clustered around her, taking charge of the child, moving both of them away from the blaze, the building behind them bright with flames. Ross broke free of the restraining hands and went to her. She collapsed into his arms, and they sank to the rain-soaked pavement. "Steph," he murmured in relief, hugging her tightly. "It's all right, John," she whispered, nodding into his shoulder. Firefighters rushing past them in dark knots, hoses trailing after her like snakes. "It's all right." Fresh Start burned for another hour before the fire was extinguished. The blaze did not spread to the nearby buildings, but was contained. The shelter was a total loss. All of the women and children housed in the building were safely evacuated, in large part because of Steph's quick action in getting to them before the blaze spread to the sleeping rooms. Only the night manager did not escape. His ruined body was found in the basement, lying near the charred filing cabinets and records bins. It took only a short time to make a tentative identification. It was a man, not a woman, and Ray Hapgood had been on duty and was unaccounted for. It was 3 a.m. when Ross and Steph re-entered their apartment and closed the door softly behind them. They stood holding each other in the darkness for a long time, breathing into each other's shoulders in the silence, saying nothing. Ross could not stop thinking about Ray. "How could this have happened?" he whispered finally, his voice still tight with shock. Steph shook her head and said nothing. "What was Ray doing there?" he pressed, lifting his head away from her shoulder to look at her. "It wasn't his duty. He was supposed to go out to his sister's in Kent. He told me so." Her fingers tightened on his arms. "Let it go, John." A stubborn determination infused him. "I don't want to let it go. Who had the duty tonight? Who?" She lifted her head slightly, and he could see the angry welts and bruises on her face. "Simon makes up the list, John. Ask him." "I'm asking you. Who had the duty?" She blinked back the tears that suddenly filled her eyes. "You did. But when you went home sick, Ray offered to fill in." He stared at her in disbelief. He had the duty? He couldn't remember it. Why hadn't he known? Even before he was sick, why hadn't he known? It should have been posted. It must have been. He was certain he had looked at the list. So why didn't he remember seeing his name? He felt worn and defeated. He stood in the dark, holding Steph and looking into her eyes, and for the first time in a long time he was uncertain about everything. "Did you see my name?" "John, did you, Steph?" She nodded. "Yes." She touched his face. "This isn't your fault, John. Just because you weren't there and Ray was, doesn't mean it's your fault." He nodded because that was what she expected him to do, but he was thinking that it felt like it was his fault. just as it had felt like it was his fault at San Sobel. Any failure of responsibility or neglect of duty belonged to him, and nothing could change that. He closed his eyes against what he was feeling. Ray Hapgood had been his friend, his good friend, and he had let him die. "John, listen to me." Steph was speaking again, her face close to his, her body pressing against him in the darkness. "I don't know why this happened. I don't know how it happened. No one does. Not yet. So don't go jumping to conclusions. Don't be shouldering the blame until you know the facts. I'm sorry Ray is dead, but you didn't kill him. And if it had to be someone, I would rather it was him than you." He opened his eyes, surprised by her vehemence. "Steph." She shook her head emphatically. "I'm sorry, but that's how I feel." She kissed him hard, and he kissed her back and held her tightly against him. "I just can't believe he's gone," he whispered, his hand stroking her slender back. "I know." They held each other for a long moment, and then she led him to the bedroom. They undressed in the dark and crawled into the bed and held each other again in the cool of the sheets. The streets beyond their window were silent and empty. All the fire trucks, police cars, ambulances, and bystanders were gone. The rain had faded away, and the air was damp and cold in the wake of its passing. Ross hugged Steph's smooth body against his own and listened to the soft, velvet sound of her breathing. "I could have lost you tonight," he whispered. She nodded. "But you didn't." "I was scared I had." He took a long, slow breath and let it out. "When you were inside, bringing out the last of those children, and I saw the flames climbing the walls, I thought for sure I had." "No, John," she whispered, kissing him gently over and over. "You won't lose me ever. I promise. No matter what, you won't lose me." The dream comes swiftly, a familiar acquaintance he wishes now he had never made. He stands once more on the hillside south of Seattle, watching as the city burns, as the hordes of the void swarm through the collapsed defenses and begin their ritual of killing and destruction. He sees the battle taking place on the high bridge, where a last futile defense has been mounted. He sees the steel and glass towers swallowed in flames. He sees the bright waters of the bay and the Sound turn red in the reflected glare. He finds he is cold and indifferent to what he witnesses. He is detached in a way he cannot explain, but seems perfectly normal in his dream, as if he has been this way a long time. He is himself, and at the same time he is someone else entirely. He pauses to examine this phenomenon, and decides he has changed dramatically from when he was a knight of the Word. He is a knight no longer, but he remembers when he was. Oddly, his memories are tinged with a wistfulness he can't quite escape. Before him, Seattle burns. By nightfall, it will have ceased to exist. Like his old life, like the person he once was. There are people huddled about him, and they glance at him fearfully when they think he is not looking. They are right to fear him. He holds over them the power of life and death. They are his captives. They are his to do with as he chooses, and they are anxious to discover what he has planned for them. The exercise of such power is a curious feeling, because it both attracts and repels him. He wonders in a vague sort of way how he got to this point in his life. From the long, dark span of the high bridge, bodies tumble into an abyss of smoke and fire like rag dolls. Their screams cannot be heard. The old man approaches, as he has approached each time in the dream, and points his bony finger at Ross and whispers in his hoarse, ruined voice, I know you. Get away from me, Ross orders in disgust and dismay, not wanting to hear the words he will speak. I know you, the old man repeats, undeterred, the bright light of his madness shining in his strange, milky eyes. You are the one who killed him. I was there. Ross stands his ground because he cannot afford to turn away. His captives are watching, listening, waiting for his response. They will measure his strength accordingly. The old man sways as if he were a reed caught in a stiff wind, stick-thin and ragged, his mind unbalanced, his laughter filled with echoes of his shattered life. Get away from me, Ross says once more. The Wizard of Oz. You killed him. I remember your face. I saw you. There in the glass palace, in the shadow of the Tin Woodman, in the Emerald City, on All Hallows Eve. You killed the Wizard of Oz. You killed him. You. The words fade and die, and the old man begins to cry softly. Oh God, it was the end of everything. Ross shakes his head. It is a familiar litany by now. He has heard it before, and he turns away in curt dismissal. It's all in the past, and the past no longer matters to him. But the old man presses closer, insistent. I saw you. I watched you do it. I could not understand. He was your friend. There was no reason. There was a reason, he thinks to himself, though he cannot remember it now. But the young woman. The old man is on his knees, his head hanging dog-like between his slumped shoulders. What reason did you have for killing her? Ross starts, shaken now. What young woman? Couldn't you have spared her? She was just trying to help. She seemed to know you. Ross screams in fury and shoves the old man away. The old man tumbles backward into the mud, gasping in shock. Shut up! Ross screams at him, furious, dismayed, because now he remembers this as well, another part of the past he had thought buried, a truth he had left behind in the debris of his conversion. Shut up, shut up, shut up! The old man tries to crawl away, but
deeply puzzling to wizards. So what, they say? Staffs have always had knobs on. What's funny about that? It's just the tool of our trade. It's nothing to joke about. The knobs may be ornate jewellery, a complicated piece of sculpture, a music box, or even a small polished container handy for some matches and a packet of fags. Sometimes such artificial additions are not required, because the staff grows its own knob, a growth rather like the knees grown by the American swamp cypress. Because this gall is the wood's response to the magic within it, it can take many forms, the face of the wizard himself, or an object dear to him, or even stranger things. Staffs made of metal are occasionally tried. They are efficient, but somehow the magic always seems to change for the worse. Standards, Ankh-Morporkian. Obviously any civilization needs some way of standardizing weights and measures and time. In modern times, for example, an official unit of measurement is likely to be a length of metal bar kept at a precise temperature, or some reproducible count based on atomic decay or the speed of light. The old Ankh-Morpork Bureau of Measures in the Barbican still performs this role for a large part of the Discworld, but less so for its common units of measurement, which in any case have been filed down, soldered onto, drilled, and had bits of chewing gum stuck to them on too many occasions, than for its more esoteric ones, a legacy of the precise-minded patrician Olaf Quimby II. Here, for example, may be found the exact blunt stick, a crude but effective measurement of the acceptability of just about anything. It is this blunt stick. Note, originally a sharp stick was installed, but extensive tests found that few things were worse than a poke in the eye with it, that the test object may or may not be better than. Although the official pie, that it may even be as nice as, is not maintained here, there is a standardized recipe readily available. Also kept in a glass cabinet are the original 2 short planks, and the stone used in the original moss-gathering trials. Bureau officials still maintain a small program of tests of, for instance, the degree of similarity of any 2 peas, or the alcoholic tendencies of newts. It is vital, as Lord Vetinari has noted, that something like this is found for people with minds like that to do, otherwise they might do anything. Standing stone, stands on the crest of the moor in the Ramtops. It is the same height as a tall man, and is made of bluish-tinted rock. It is considered to be intensely magical because, although there is only one of it, no one has ever been able to count it. If it sees anyone looking at it speculatively, it shuffles behind them, and, in extreme cases, goes and hides in the peat bogs. It is also one of the numerous discharge points for the magic that accumulates in the Ramtops. W.S. Stibbons, Ponder. Originally a fellow student wizard with Victor Tugelbend at Unseen University, and also known to his UU colleagues as Poncy Stibbons and Stibbo. He graduated by getting Victor's rigged exam paper in error, which had one question: name. Originally rather lazy by nature, he seems to have blossomed to become the youngest and most depressingly keen member of the UU faculty. He is now the head of Inadvisably Applied Magic, as well as the Reader in Invisible Writings, and Praelector of UU. As one of the few wizards at the university with his head screwed on in any fashion, he appears, quite against his will, to be in the front line. He has discovered too late that he has the unfortunate defect of a logical mind and an incipient desire to understand the universe. He is in some way the creator of Hex, the UU computer, although now Hex appears to be self-creating. Ponder once played third goblin in his school play. Stow Hellet, Duke of. Original motto: Faber est quisque fortunae suae. Original coat of arms: a boar's head, sable, on a field, argent. A man with a little moustache and a grin like a lizard. Not the nicest of people, since he was quite capable of killing all who stood between him and the throne of Stow Hellet, or even between him and the drinks cabinet. He murdered his way close to the throne of Stow Lat, and was only prevented from killing Princess Kelly, the last barrier to his accession, by the actions of Mort. M. Stow Hellet, Susan, daughter of Mort and Isabel, and granddaughter of Death, from whom she has inherited a number of traits. This should be impossible, since Isabel was adopted, but see genetics. A self-possessed and somewhat chilly young woman. As a pupil at the Quirm College for Young Ladies, she was good at those sports that involved swinging some sort of stick, hockey, lacrosse, rounders, and she was academically brilliant at the things she liked doing, but brilliant like a diamond, all edges and coldness, as it were. It is noteworthy that the only other pupils she even vaguely considered friends were a dwarf and a troll, both in some way outcasts from normal school society. She had, and has, the ability to make herself so inconspicuous as to be invisible to non-magical minds, a definite family attribute. She is attractive in a skinny way, and while still quite young, has an indefinable air of age about her. Her hair is pure white, apart from a black streak. Initially it was uncontrollable, but now it tends to follow her mood, restyling itself into a tight bun or a ponytail or whatever other shape suits the occasion. This is clearly a by-product of all the other talent she has inherited from her grandfather, although Death himself needs few tonsorial attentions, other than the occasional moment with a duster. She moves like a tiger, and she has a most disconcerting look, cool and calm, but not something you'd want to see twice. On Susan's face is a birthmark, which shows up only when she blushes or when she is angry, and these days she is angry far more frequently than she is embarrassed. It takes the form of 3 pale lines across her cheek. Discworld students will recall that her father was once slapped across the face by Death, leaving just such a mark. Discworld heredity at work again, it seems. When she is covering for her grandfather, she wears a black lace dress of the sort worn by healthy yet necro-nerdic young women who want to look consumptive. She currently works as a schoolteacher and is a remarkably effective one. Because of her own rather special upbringing, her parents, although very caring, avoided the whole magical childhood fantasy business in an ultimately useless effort to shield her from the influence of her grandfather. She tends to treat children as inconveniently small adults, and, to her amazement, this works very well. Unlucky with boys, or perhaps lucky, depending on your point of view. In any case, relationships don't seem to last. SM and H and TOT. Stow-Lat, a walled city kingdom 20 miles hubwards of Ankh-Morpork, clustered around a castle built on a rock outcrop that pokes up out of the Stow Plains like a geological pimple. It is a huge stone from the distant Ramtops, which was left there by retreating glaciers. Its younger citizens consider it to be boring, and indeed its night-life is not as colourful and full of incident as that of Ankh-Morpork, in the same way that a waste paper basket cannot compete with a municipal tip, on fire, in the rain. Stow Plains, a rich country full of silt and rolling cabbage fields and neat little kingdoms whose boundaries wriggle like snakes as small, formal wars, marriage pacts, complex alliances, and the occasional bit of sloppy cartography change the political shape of the land. The thick, black loam of the Stow Plains has been constructed over eons by the periodic flooding of the great, slow Ankh, and every bit of it has at some time travelled along someone's alimentary canal. M.S. Street Theatre. Prohibition of. Street theatre and mime artistry are banned in Ankh-Morpork, under one of the strictest city ordinances. Fire-eaters and jugglers are considered acceptable, provided they are good at it and can pass the exam. In the case of jugglers, this consists of juggling 6 razor-sharp knives and a live cat. It is seldom necessary to take the exam a second time. The unusually inflexible rule has led to the development of street theatre as a criminal activity, and those who feel inexorably drawn to looking like a dumb tit in white makeup or hectoring people while doing something dull with a diabolo live a desperate existence outside the law. Many of them have more mundane jobs as a cover, but they can be spotted by their tendency to unicycle when they think no one is looking. If caught, they are imprisoned and tortured, usually by being put in a cell with one another, although scorpions also often feature. No one is certain why the patrician, who has a relaxed approach to assassins and thieves, has this particular quirk, but the citizens of Ankh-Morpork seem quite happy to accept it. Struth, an opal miner in 4X, who found the luggage in a mine. TLC. Strippers Guild. Motto, Numquam Vestimus. Coat of arms, On Leve. Officially the Guild of Ecdysiasts, Nautchers, Cancaniers, and exponents of exotic dance. This small, all-female and mainly human guild is located in Soso Street, Soso. Its members are hard-working women, especially at lunchtimes. Ankh-Morpork is in many respects an unreconstructed society, and removing one's clothes for money is considered perfectly acceptable, although doing it for nothing would be considered immoral. Dwarfs have no grasp of the basic idea, since removing any item of clothing, except in the direst emergency, is quite foreign to them, and there are no dwarf members. Trolls, however, form a small but vital part of the membership. Although the troll outlook on life, their habit of going around more or less naked in any case, and their unusual grasp of the nature of time, all mean that a troll stripper actually dons more clothes as the dance progresses, often causing a riot as the fourth overcoat goes on. The guild president for life, and indeed the entire committee, is Miss Dixie Vava Voom, now officially retired from the stage, along with Edward the Snake, but still taking a very active part in the guild's training programme. Her farewell performance in the Skunk Club, Brewer Street, resulted in 3 heart attacks, a riot, and 5 separate fires. As she tells her trainees, it's not what you've got, but what you do with it that counts. Sun, place where it does not shine. This has been firmly located near Slice, Lanka, where it is coincidentally between a rock and a hard place. It is, as its name suggests, a deep, dark hole under an overhang, so that even heavy Discworld light cannot find its way into it. The people of Slice, considered crazed even by Lanka standards, occasionally lower one of their number to prospect for the items that turn up there, usually workmen's tools, musical instruments, and unpopular jobs. This geographical anomaly serves to illustrate the unusual role of metaphor and colourful language on the Discworld. As another example, the Curio Biological Museum in Unseen University contains, amongst even stranger things, the one that has bells on, preserved in formaldehyde, and the original horse you rode in on, stuffed. Sunshine Sanctuary for Sick Dragons, located in Morphic Street, Ankh-Morpork. Outside is a small and hollow and pathetic papier-mâché dragon holding a collection box chained very heavily to the wall and bearing the sign, "Don't let my flame go out." There is a large sign scrawled over the double gates, "Here be dragons." A brass plaque beside the gate reads, "The Ankh-Morpork Sunshine Sanctuary for Sick Dragons." There is also yet another, smaller sign, "Please leave donations of coal by side door." The building is built with very, very thick walls and a very, very lightweight roof, a method of construction found elsewhere only in firework factories. All these things are clues, you might say, to the fact that the sanctuary is a home for lost or strayed or abandoned swamp dragons. There tend to be more of the latter every day. There is occasionally a vogue for keeping young swamp dragons as pets, or even as cigarette lighters, but the charm wears off as the creatures grow, and their essential dragonishness manifests itself in corroded carpets and big burn marks on the walls. Many are simply abandoned, and if they are lucky they end up at the sanctuary. This charity is run by Rosie Devant Molliai, with the very regular help of Lady Sybil Ramkin, now Vimes. Much of the actual work is done by a group of betrousered, upper-class young women, described by that class warrior, His Grace Commander Sir Samuel Vimes, Duke of Ankh, as the interchangeable Emmas. Supreme Grand Master, leader of the unique and supreme lodge of the elucidated Brethren of the Ebon Night. See also Once Lupine. G. Susan. See Stow Hellet, Susan. Swing. Captain Find Thee. Principal officer of the original Cable Street Particulars. A small, thin, pale man with the screwed-up eyes of a pet rat. He looks like a clerk, a look reinforced by his lank hair, thick black strands plastered across a central bald spot. He is rumoured to have a weak chest. He moves, as he talks, in a curious mix of speeds, as if he has no sense of timing. Captain Swing trained at the assassin's school and had too much brain to be a copper, at least too much of the wrong kind of brain. However, he impressed the then patrician Lord Winder, was allowed into the watch as a sergeant, and was promoted immediately to captain. His attitude was not, "This is how people are, how do we deal with it?" He went instead for, "This is how people ought to be, how do we change them?" Captain Swing invented craniometrics, the science of judging whether people do or do not have criminal tendencies by taking detailed measurements of the shape and conformation of their heads and faces. He usually carried a sword cane, steel ruler, and steel calipers, the latter, too, to allow him to measure people he met. N.W. Swires. Buggy. A gnome, first met during the events of the light fantastic. He lived in a mushroom with a red and white spotted cap and little doors and windows. He is 6 inches high, picks his nose, and looks like someone who smells like someone who lives in a mushroom. He is now a corporal in the Ankh-Morpork City Watch. He has an inbuilt resistance to rules, not just to the law, but also to those invisible rules, such as, "Do not attempt to eat this giraffe." T. Tacticus. General. His intelligent campaigning was so successful that he has given his name to the detailed prosecution of martial endeavour. J. and C.J. Tantony. Captain. Captain of the Bonk City Watch, in his uniform of shiny breastplate, silly helmet, and unnicked sword. He is an agonizingly logical young man, but also fair and ethical. T.F.E. Tanty. The Ankh-Morpork's principal prison building, whose very mention chilled the blood of criminals throughout and beyond Ankh-Morpork. It was at one time the Palace de Tantamont, ancestral home of the Duc de Tantamont. It is a dark, damp edifice, with no fresh air, food, or water, and so probably reminds prisoners of home. Everything has to be bought from the warders, including the lice, which must be handed back when you leave. Convicted criminals generally spend most of their time in the Sally Dancy, the huge communal cell where they meet friends old and new. It's a tough life, but they have opportunities to improve their skills, and in fact, the Thieves' Guild runs extensive courses there. Those with extra cash can hire a cell in the Crush Yard, where, for little more than the price of a mansion in Park Lane, they can enjoy a warm fire, clean sheets, and food that has not been spat in. T.G.D. Tear of Offler, the biggest diamond in the world, weighing 850 carats, used to be kept in the innermost sanctuary of the lost jewelled temple of doom of Offler, the crocodile god, in darkest Hawondaland. All Ophlian temples have a tier of greater or lesser size, and they are stolen on a regular basis. This particular one was picked up after the harvest dance at Sheepridge, and given to his daughter by William Spigot, who reasoned that any gem that big had to be glass. R.M. Tea time. Jonathan, student at the Assassin's Guild. He preferred his surname to be pronounced Tiataima. He was a very thin young man, with a friendly pink and white face, topped by curly hair. Quite pretty in a boyish sort of way, although this effect was spoiled by his eyes. One was a ball of grey glass, the result of some childhood accident, and the real one had a small, sharp pupil. Mr. Teatime saw things differently from other people, in that he saw other people as things. He lost both his parents at an early age in a tragic accident that occurred while they were leaning over his playpen. In A Student Assassin, this might have been considered prescient. He had a truly brilliant mind, but brilliant like a fractured mirror, all marvellous facets and rainbows, but ultimately something that is broken. H. Temperance. Uberwald League of. This new society for reformed vampires, black ribboners, exists to further the cause of temperance and of total abstinence from drinking human blood. The old ways, to provide recreation and means of social intercourse for its members, and to assist members by means of meetings, lectures, discussions, sing-songs, and healthy, refreshing cocoa, to help one another refrain from the old ways. Branches opened first in Uberwald, but have quickly spread to Ankh-Morpork. Tepic, or Potepic, son of King Tepikaimon the 27th and 1398th monarch of Jellybaby. His father shocked the country's priesthood by sending his son away to be trained at the Assassin's School in Ankh-Morpork. Since he had heard that it gave a very good education, the priesthood were very much against any kind of secular education for someone who would one day be a god. After many adventures, Tepic returned to his own country and acceded to the throne, and then abdicated in favour of the handmaiden Patraki. P. Tepikaimon the 27th, 1397th monarch of Jellybaby, Tepic's father, also known as Pootle by his grandmother, a pleasant and intelligent man who was therefore entirely unsuited to be king of that sombre kingdom. He died in an accident when he thought he could fly. It is a well-known fact that too much intelligence in a monarch is a bad thing for all concerned. P. Tethys, a sea troll, a lengthman for Krull. He originally came from the water world of Bathis, but was first encountered in a driftwood shanty on a crag on the rim of the world. Through the shanty passed a rope leading to the 10,000-mile-long net, which runs along the circumfence to catch the salvage arriving at the rim. Tethys was a rather squat, although his height altered with the tides, but not entirely ugly old troll composed of water and little else. He was a pleasant, translucent blue colour, with cold, fishy breath, and a voice that made people think of submarine chasms and things lurking in coral reefs. He briefly left the disk with Two-Flower and Rincewind, and has not been heard of since. The potent Voyager, the ship on which they reluctantly travelled, eventually landed in a lake near Skund. Presumably he is still there. C.O.M. Tezuman, Empire, Kingdom of Tezuma. Kingdom in the jungle valleys of central Klatch. The people are renowned for being the most suicidally gloomy, irritable, and pessimistic you could ever hope to avoid meeting. The Tezuman invented the wheel, but didn't put it to its right use. As a result, their chariots, which are pulled by llamas, have two people running along each side holding up the axles. The wheel itself is used as headgear and jewellery. Nor have the Tezumen discovered paper or even wax tablets. Their pictographic language is chiselled into blocks of granite, allowing the more depressed members of the tribe to beat themselves to death with their own suicide notes. The country is known for its organic market gardens, exquisite craftsmanship in obsidian, feathers and jade, and its mass sacrifices in honour of Quetzalcoatl. Their music sounds like someone clearing a particularly difficult nostril. E. Thargum I, red-bearded past king of Lanka. When he was killed, poisoned by the father of Verence I, they stuck his head on a pole and carried it around the village to show that he was dead, an exercise that everyone thought was very convincing. Then they had a big bonfire, and everyone in the palace got drunk for a week. No one remembers now whether Thargum was particularly good or bad. Lanka people are traditionalists and aren't choosy about their monarchs. But the greatest sin an incumbent of the throne can commit is not acting like a proper king. W.S. Thorm, the basic and traditional unit of magical strength. It has been universally established as the amount of magic needed to create one small white pigeon or 3 normal-sized billiard balls. A smaller measure for purposes of calculation is the millithorm. A thermometer is used to measure the density of a magical field. It is a dark blue glass cube with a dial on the front and a button on the side. In Unseen University's high-energy magic building, the thorm has been successfully demonstrated to be made up of resons, literally thingies or reality fragments. Current research indicates that each reson is itself made up of a combination of at least 5 flavours, known as up, down, sideways, sex appeal, and peppermint. The students at UU have discussed the possibility of the power to be gained from splitting the thorm on an industrial basis, but have been dissuaded by their superiors on the grounds that this would make the place untidy. See also prime. Thaumaturgists. Many spells require things like mould from a corpse dead of crushing, or the semen of a living tiger, or the root of a plant that gives an ultrasonic scream when it is uprooted. Who is sent to get them? Right. Thaumaturgists receive no magical schooling. They can just about be trusted to wash out an alembic. They are the lowest rung of the hierarchy of magical practitioners, apart from witches, of course. That's the wizard's view. E.R. Thieves' Guild. Motto, Acutus id verberat. Whip it quick. Coat of arms, a shield with alternate bars of sable and argent. On it, a bourse, coupé. Originally known as the Guild of Thieves, and then the Guild of Thieves, Cutpursers, Housebreakers, and Allied Trades, and latterly the Guild of Thieves, Burglars, and Allied Trades, purse-cutting having fallen out of favour. Despite its pretensions to ghastly brigandage and claims to venerable antiquity, based on a perceived descent from the ancient gangs that roamed the city, the Guild is a young and very respectable body which, in a practical sense, represents the major law enforcement agency in Ankh-Morpork. The Guild is given an annual quota which represents a socially acceptable level of thefts and muggings, and in return sees to it in very definite and final ways that unofficial crime is not only stamped out, but also knifed, garroted, dismembered, and left around the city in an assortment of paper bags. In keeping the lid on unofficial crime, they have turned out to be far more efficient than the Watch, who could only cut crime by working harder. The Guild, on the other hand, have only to work less. All of this functions so effectively that when, in the year of the engaging sloth, the Guild declared a general strike, the level of crime actually doubled. This formal system, introduced by Lord Vetinari, is held to be a cheap and enlightened arrangement, except by those malcontents who are actually mugged or robbed and refuse to see it as their social duty. It enables the thieves to plan a decent career structure, entrance examinations and codes of conduct similar to those adopted by the city's other professions, which, the gap not being very wide in any case, they have rapidly come to resemble. The Guild have also introduced a complex system of annual budgeting, licensing, chits and allowances to see that A. the members can make a reasonable living, and B. no citizen is robbed or assaulted more than an agreed number of times. Many far-sighted citizens, in fact, arrange to get an acceptable minimum amount of theft, assault, etc. over at the beginning of the year, often in the privacy of their own homes, and are therefore able to walk the streets quite safely for the rest of the year. A number of small firms operate under the auspices of the Guild, offering attentive and personal service to this end. The following extract from a recent Guild publication summarizes the position. Why is there still a Guild? There has been some grumbling about Guild activities and changes in the budget, and some people have been saying perhaps the city can do without the Thieves' Guild at all. We have the watch, they say. Crime is always with us. Well, not with us as such, obviously, but with civilization in general, and we owe it to Lord Vetinari for pointing out that, since this is the case, it could be done better. And we do it better, and we do it reliably, and we do it traditionally. Look at the situation in those cities that do not have guilds. People don't know when they are going to be robbed. They don't know how much will be taken. They live in fear of crime, rather than, as in Ankh-Morpork, accepting it as a kind of goods and services tax. Why is this? Because they are in the hands of amateurs. Take your non-guild burglar, for example. What does he know about skilled lock-picking? Or casing the joint? About being quiet? Nothing. He smashes a window, turns out all the drawers, rummages around where he shouldn't, and that's only the start of your problems. How often have you heard people say, "I wouldn't have minded, they didn't take much, but the mess"? That's not the work of a guild burglar. Usually, people will not find out they've been robbed.
Twisting around, she pressed her cheek to his chest as the tears
rhymes. she said.